So I've been thinking more about the idea of taking ownership for where you land in life. And I don't mean this in a harsh blame yourself for everything, but more like owning your journey, you know, owning your role on how your life evolves, how your relationships grow, how your money grows or doesn't, and how you feel when you wake up each day. Because for a long time, I wasn't doing that. I was reacting to the world around me, to people, to circumstances, to what I felt I deserved. And when things didn't go my way, I blamed the outside. People who didn't show up for me, the job market, the economy, the system, you name it. But the second I flipped that mindset and asked the question, what if it's on me? Things started to change a little bit. And same with money. Here's a narrative that people my age share, that everything is stacked against us. And a lot of it is actually true. Homes are unaffordable, salaries haven't kept up, and inflation's eating into everything. But here's the thing. Staying in that frustrated state didn't do anything for me. In fact, it made me feel more powerless. And so I started learning about how money works, about asymmetric bets, hedging against inflation, the hurdle rate, concepts that were never taught to us in school but changed the way I thought about savings. And suddenly, with the limited amount of money I was able to save, I was able to find ways to outpace inflation, to grow, and to build optionality. And that's all because I stopped waiting for someone or something to save me. And that same mindset started bleeding into other areas of my life, like relationships. I was so focused on how people treated me that I never really took out the time to see how I showed up. And once I started taking responsibility, not for how they behaved, but for how I responded, the patterns that I repeated, the way I communicated or withdrew, it taught me so much about myself. And what I've realized is that I have a mix of narcissistic tendencies and an anxious attachment style. And what that meant is that I looked for validation outside of me. I constantly needed someone to remind me that I was enough. And the second someone leaned in and gave me that attention, I withdrew. And I only wanted things my way. It was almost like I was creating this game where I couldn't win and they couldn't either. I would previously just go like, they weren't the right person, they didn't get me. But now I ask myself, how did I show up in that space? That switch from blaming to owning, it's made me a lot more curious about how I move in relationships. And I guess that brings me back to where I am right now. Been sitting with this question that's been coming up a lot. Am I okay being single? If that's where taking ownership leads me to right now. And here's the truth. When you start doing the work, when you stop settling, when you stop repeating old patterns, it can get lonely for a while. But maybe that loneliness isn't a punishment. Maybe it's just that space between the old story and the one you're writing for yourself right now. But society doesn't make space for that, right? There's always this pressure to be with someone, especially as you're getting older, that time's running out. But I think I'm learning that it's okay to not have everything figured out, and that being single isn't a punishment, but rather a season where I can focus on being somebody who's ready to give and receive love from a grounded place, not from anxiety or validation seeking or from the fear of being alone. So yeah, taking responsibility for where I land in life, in love, in money, in health, it's been one of the most freeing things I've ever done. And it's not always been easy because it forces you to look at things that you don't really want to look at. But what it also means is that I get to shape what happens next. And I think that's very powerful. Walking alone can feel like the scariest thing sometimes. But the more I think about it, every major turning point in life, it's like crossing a bridge that's only wide enough for one. Because no matter how many people love or support you, there are a few thresholds that you have to cross alone. Nobody's going to walk it for you. Not when you are rebuilding yourself, not when you are breaking patterns, and not when you're trying to figure out who you really are. And yeah, it's uncomfortable and it's very challenging. But that's where the shift happens, right? When you stop waiting for someone to show you the way, you start realizing that maybe you're the one who holds the map. And so maybe walking alone isn't a sign that something's wrong. Maybe it's a sign that you're finally on your way. I'll see you guys in the next one.